Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. So in today's video we're going to be talking about my worst books of 2020. So 2020 has been a bit of an underwhelming reading year for me, I must admit. I think a lot of the things I read I probably rated at about a 3-star. Not a lot really shone through as great, but the ones that did I will be mentioning in my best books of 2020, which I will link up there. It is yet to be filmed. And there were quite a few sort of 1 stars, 2 stars, and even DNFs, which I don't DNF books very often. I should, but that's a topic for another video. But yeah, there's been a few definite blips of this year's reading, so I will go through them with you just now. And I'll kind of do it probably in the order I read them, because I'm going to have Goodreads open in front of me, and we'll go through the books this year that just really didn't hit the mark for me. So this year was a year that I tried quite a few new authors, and one of those was Margaret Atwood. So a very lauded author, a lot of people love her stuff. It turns out I'm not a fan. So one of the first books this year that I actually DNF'd because I hated it was Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood. So Alias Grace follows Grace Marks. It's set in the 1840s, and Grace Marks, she has been convicted for her involvement in the murders of her employer, his housekeeper, and his mistress. Some believe she's innocent, some believe she's evil, and others think she's just plain insane. She's serving a life sentence for these murders, and I think if I remember correctly, she claims not to remember what happened. I honestly can't remember. This was right back at the start of the year when I attempted to read this. So an expert sort of in the field of mental illness anyway, he comes to speak to her and tries to get her memories back of what happened on that day, and so we're to find out if she's innocent or if she's in fact guilty. And I found this to be incredibly dull. I got to the point before I DNF'd this book that I just didn't care. I didn't care if she was the murderer. I didn't care if she was innocent. I didn't care if she was guilty. I didn't care. It was so boring. No, absolutely not. The premise sounded interesting, and I've read things with similar concepts before, enjoyed them, but no, absolutely not for me. Yeah, just absolutely not. So I got quite a fair way through this book, probably about 2/3 of the way through at least, and then I put it down, and I was just like, no, I just couldn't. It was just not what I wanted to read at the time, and I was kind of sad that my first foray into Margaret Atwood was a dud. Like I say, many people love this book. It's, yeah, not for me, unfortunately, and it was a bit of a blip for so early in the year, but yeah, definitely not a book for me. So the next dud book of this year was Stay by Tia Louise. Again, not a fan. Now this is a romance novel, and it's about Emmy Barton, who's our heroine, and Stephen Hastings. Basically these two have a quickie in the past, meant a lot more to one than the other, and Emmy harbours a bit of ill feeling towards him for this. At least 10 years later they reunite, and it's basically sort of enemies to lovers / marriage of convenience kind of story. I thought it was drivel. It was absolute drivel. I like a trashy romance as much as the next person, but this one just, it was just endless sex scene after sex scene. It was just, very little plot to this one. Heroine has got a bit of a douchebag of an ex-husband, and Stephen is marrying her to help out with some medical bills and such. That's all fine. That's all absolutely fine. If you're a bit triggered by young child having an illness, then maybe avoid this one, but that's kind of a part of the plot. But yeah, there's very little to say about this book because it had zero substance. It's not like I hated it. It's not like, yeah, it's not hate worthy. It was just meh. Absolutely meh. The child, Eli, I think his name was really, really cute. No issues with him. And the best friend of Emmy is a former beauty queen. She's hilarious. So like the side characters had more substance than the main characters because they just couldn't stop having sex with each other to do anything else. So yeah, not the best. I doubt I'll read anything else by this author. not really my kind of thing. As much as I like a steamy, trashy romance, that's all great. But I kind of want to feel something for the characters, and I didn't. I just, no. Let's just stop talking about this one. It's rubbish. I don't recommend. So speaking of rubbish that I don't recommend you pick up, another DNF. This is The Legend of the Blue Eyes by B. Kristen McMichael. Now, I'm trying to think if I can remember enough of this book to tell you why I disliked it. I think I gave it a 2. No, I didn't. I lie. I gave it 1. It is about Alias Grace. She's 16 and she's got your standard teenage Midwestern life, but her parents have died. She's raised by some relatives, and she finds out on her 16th birthday that she's actually, like, I think it's part vampire and part demon, and her mother and father's families are at war, and she's like the bridge of peace between the two families, or meant to be, something along those lines. I DNF'd this book pretty quickly, I'm gonna be honest. I hated the writing. It was so poor that I couldn't get past it. The main character, Ariana, was just so juvenile and annoying, and yeah, my disgust for this book was evident fairly quickly. So I really can't comment on the plot that much. I hated it so much that I couldn't even get that deep into the plot. I think I must have only been about third in when I DNF'd this one. I think it's a trilogy. I really didn't like it, so I don't recommend this one, but unfortunately I can't really tell you a lot more about why. I DNF'd it mainly based on hating the main character and hating the writing style, so I can't really go much more into it than that. 1 was generous for me. I hated it. This is probably one of my least favourite books I attempted to read this year. Absolutely. I can't believe it. This poor author is on my worst books of 2020 list twice, but unfortunately, here we go again, Margaret Atwood. I then read The Handmaid's Tale. I figured if I'm gonna like any of her books, it must be The Handmaid's Tale, because it's so well known. There's a TV show about it. Loads of people rave about this book. Looking at Goodreads, it's got a 4.11 standard rating. It's been rated over 1 million times. Yeah, a lot of people really love this book, and I must admit I really loved the concept of the book. The story follows Offred, who is a handmaid in a sort of a new republic. It was after like the basically fall of civilization as we know it. There are sort of elite members of society, and there are these women called the handmaids, and they basically have the job of producing children for these more elite members of society. Fertility's been declining, and many women can't have children anymore. So a couple, say someone high up in the military, I think this book has a commander in it, and his wife, they can't have children, so they're given a handmaid, and the husband's job is essentially to impregnate this handmaid, and she will hopefully get pregnant and give that family a child, and then move on to another family to do the same thing again, and essentially use her up until she can't give any more children is basically the point. Which obviously is a horrific setup, basically just a walking oven to have other people's children. She hasn't really got any rights or feelings of her own. She's not allowed to do anything. Her life is very strict. It's, you know, it sounds pretty horrible. There's no getting away from it. So the concept of this was really interesting to me. I thought that the topic would be interesting to read about. I haven't actually watched the TV show. I want to read the book first. I don't know if I now will watch the TV show. I don't know, again, found this really quite dull. Considering how interesting I found the topic, I don't know why I found it so boring. I'm assuming I just don't like Margaret Atwood's writing style, because that's 2 books that I liked the concept of and yet found them dull. Now, I did finish this one, but it was a push and I didn't enjoy it. I gave it a 2. I didn't like the main character. I mean, obviously, I don't think she's meant to be likeable per se. She's not really allowed to be anybody. You have switching back from her in the present times and her past when she was still allowed to be a normal person with a partner and a child of her own. And obviously she kind of has flashbacks to when things were normal, and then obviously her new life where she is a body, essentially a walking body used for its reproductive purposes. Yeah, again, I was so bored. I was so beyond bored. I hated everybody. I don't need to like the characters in order to like a book. I genuinely don't, but I was just so bored. There's, you know, it is what it says on the tin. You know, it shows you this sort of dystopian kind of world where society as we know it has disintegrated, and obviously they're trying to, you know, keep births happening, and obviously they want these kind of better off families to have the children and raise them up and all this stuff. You know, it's one of those books that I can imagine would be a great discussion point for a book club and that kind of stuff. The concept is very, very interesting, and you know, it's not even something that seems that far-fetched. Like I say, lots of important topics, a good discussion point, but the reading experience I particularly did not enjoy. So at this point, I'm kind of giving up on Margaret Atwood. I just think her writing style's not for me. I wouldn't go as far as to say that I don't recommend this book to people. Lots of people love this book, and obviously something didn't click for me, but I think maybe that's just to do with my personal tastes more than criticism of the book. But this is how I felt. I didn't really particularly enjoy it, so what can you do? Now, finally, we're into the next few books that I read and reviewed since I had my YouTube channel, which means I have a bit more material to work with than I did with the previous ones. So that's a lot easier for me. Trying to hark my memory back to why I didn't like books back in January was definitely not easy. So the next book I'm going to speak about is one that I read, like I say, since I started my YouTube channel, so a lot more recently. This was Inborn by Thomas Enger. This is the translated works, actually, which I didn't even realise until looking at the details today. I think a lot of people have kind of mentioned reading more translated works as some of their goals for the next year. Anyway, this book actually is probably one of the highest rated on my worst books of 2020 list, if that makes sense. So normally I would reserve this for DNFs and 1 and 2 stars. Inborn I actually gave a 3-star to, but it still stuck out in my mind as one of the books I was maybe most disappointed by this year, so it's just why I had to include it on this list. So the story behind Inborn is basically there's been a double murder in a Norwegian high school, and one of the students, the student that is the suspect, was the ex-boyfriend of one of the murdered pupils. So he having a terrible time of it. Everybody's turned their back on him and think he's guilty. He's adamant he's innocent. But there's things that keep making it seem like he forgot he was out for a walk with the dog, I think, or, you know, and there was some other bits and bobs that kind of just made him look really guilty. But he's adamant that it wasn't him, he didn't do it. He's getting abuse online from people he thought were his friends, and yeah, it's, you know, it's pretty hard going for him. I think his name's, is it Evan? I think his name is Evan. And then there's a detective who is an older police detective, and he is looking into this double murder, trying to piece together what happened. So we get kind of, the stories mainly told between the detective and Evan, and Evan himself, he's telling the story kind of from sort of at the time of the murders, and he's telling the story from when he is in court. So you kind of get that. Again, the concept's really interesting. I like the flashback kind of bits, piecing it all together. The first chapter in particular was really, really good. And then it just went downhill. Again, it was really, really boring. I kind of figured out the mystery, or for the most part, and yeah, I don't know, there was just no pull for this one. I found out what happened. I kind of guessed quite a lot of it, but everything kind of wrapped up quite well. Like it tied up all the loose ends. But yeah, the characters, again, most of them were unlikable, but they just weren't the most engaging. I didn't connect to any of them. I wasn't rooting for any of them. I wasn't rooting against any of them. It was just very surface level. I think I gave this one a 3 because I kind of felt like there was nothing particularly wrong with the plot, but there was just a quality that I didn't get. And I don't know if it was because it was a translated works maybe, and I'm not reading it in the language of the author who wrote it. Maybe that's why I'm missing this connection or something. I don't know. There was just something missing with this book, and I was really disappointed by it because it started off so well, and by the end I was just like, I don't care. I don't care who was the murderer. I wasn't interested. So yeah, that's for these kind of thriller type books. If I get to the point where I'm like, I actually don't even care what the outcome is, I'm like, that's not a good sign. But like I say, I gave it 3 stars. I did finish this one. And you know, I'm not saying, I don't even think it'd be one I would say I wouldn't recommend. It just wasn't for me. I've read so many fantastic thrillers that this one was just so average, so middle of the road. Nothing stood out with this one. I wasn't gripped. So yeah, just more of an underwhelming one for me on that one. But like I say, this one's stuck in my mind for some reason. So although it's not rated as low as some of the other ones, which some of them I can't even remember reading, I kind of repressed them that much. This one wasn't as bad as those, you know, in comparison, but it stuck in my mind because I think it disappointed me. One of the most disappointing reads I had this year. This book I gave 3 stars to. This is The Good Samaritan by John Mars. Now, John Mars has been recommended to me by a few different people, and I wanted to give it a go. So this book had kind of a dark concept that I just couldn't not read. It sounded fascinating. Basically, it surrounds Laura, who is truly one of the most despicable characters I think I've ever read about. She is on the other end of the phone and on one of these Samaritans call centers, and she essentially talks to these people who are highly vulnerable, depressed, at risk, and she essentially convinces them to kill themselves. And obviously that is truly quite a terrifying thing. As someone who, you know, has struggled with their mental health, who's had friends that have even phoned places like Samaritans at their lowest points, it would be a terrifying prospect that someone on the other end was deliberately trying to make them kill themselves for their own sick desires. So that concept to me was really quite horrid and shocking. It's a really strange book. Does it deserve its 3-star rating? I don't know. I think it's powerful in a way. It's very disturbing. Was I gripped? Yes. Did I have to finish it and see what happened? Yes. Did I enjoy reading it? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The characters are so foul, awful humans that I didn't enjoy reading it. So basically, Laura has done this horrible thing to so many people. She's basically collecting these suicides for some weird satisfaction she gets. And then she, because of her influence, a pregnant woman commits suicide, and her husband, he has basically figured out that something else caused this. It wasn't just off her own back, and he kind of twigs that Laura was to blame for what happened, and so he basically tries to get revenge, which, you know, you think, right, you're going to root for Ryan here. And at the start you kind of did, but the more he tried to get revenge, the more horrible he became. And then you weren't rooting for anybody. Like, they were both equally as horrible as each other. And yeah, it took some serious twists and turns. I felt physically uncomfortable reading this book. Like, it actually gave me a sick feeling in my stomach. I really didn't like how depraved some of these acts were. They were really, truly horrid. Again, I don't need to love the characters. And in this situation, like, you were kind of compelled by them because they were so horrendous. It was very twisty and turny. It kept you on your toes, but almost too much. There were so many twists. You almost thought that one had gotten the lead, and then that one had gotten the lead. And then it was like, I feel like there's an emotional game of ping pong going on, and I'm tired now. There's too many twists. I feel like there was just too many back and forth. I think that could have been cut down a little bit. And the ending was just like a bit too open-ended for me. I wasn't satisfied by the ending. So that's probably why it's sitting at the 3 stars. It's not one that I would recommend to a lot of people. I think this could be quite triggering for people. It certainly made me feel quite anxious reading it. I think certain people would read this and love it. And I read quite dark books and I'm not bothered by them, but this one struck a nerve and I didn't enjoy it. I definitely didn't enjoy it. If you're a fan of John Mars, I think this is probably, you know, a good book to read. If you are really into what the concept is, you know, definitely give it a go. I'm not saying it's a terrible book. It was probably one of my most unpleasant reading experiences this year. It wasn't a bad book, but I felt uncomfortable reading it. I didn't enjoy it, and I actually took time to get over this book. I didn't want to read. I didn't want to read for a while once I'd finished it. It left its mark, and I'd be nervous to pick up any more by him because of how strong an effect it had on me. I wasn't keen. So yeah, that's kind of my complicated feelings on that one. Just not for me, this one. So this next book I'm going to talk about is Dead Girl Walking by Roberta Gately. Now this is a new release for this year. I think it came out on the 24th of November. And I got an art copy via NetGalley. This book, it was a book that I kind of wasn't sure whether I was going to like or not. It was basically, it's your sort of standard crime thriller book where there's been an attack, and you're trying to find the culprit, but instead of kind of being written from the perspective of the policeman or detective looking into the crime, it was written from the perspective of an ER nurse. Now, I wanted to read this because I was like, well, I really like these crime thrillery kind of books, but obviously they've got a fairly solid kind of structure where, you know, you tend to be following the police looking at things, or the criminal avoiding the police. There's a fairly standard kind of structure for these books. So I thought, let's see if it's going to be good coming from the nurse. It made no sense to come from the nurse. And the entire time I was reading this book, I was just like, why is a nurse doing this? Why is a nurse thinking this? Why is a nurse putting so much effort into trying to solve this crime? There's been a shooting, a couple are injured, and they come into the ER, and then this ER nurse, I want to say her name's Jessie Novick. She essentially sticks her nose in to try and figure out this crime. And she is incredibly smug and unlikable. She slags off the police for not doing what she considers to be a good enough job, and yet has some moments of alarming stupidity. No one seemed very with it in this book. A monkey could have figured out what the secret was. Her link to the police was incredibly tentative, obviously being a nurse. And I think it's the start of a series, and there's going to be, you know, she's going to go into the more forensic side of things, which will strengthen that connection to police, and that would make more sense. But, oh no, this was not good. This was not a good book. Maybe as the series goes on, this is going to get better. Maybe this is a weaker first book and it will improve with time, but yeah, it wasn't particularly gripping. I figured out the plot really quickly. The main characters were not very well developed. There was a weird cringeworthy love triangle that I don't really understand why it was there. The ER nurse is apparently good at everything. She's better at the police and detecting. She's a fantastic nurse, does all of her job right. Apparently her taste in men's rubbish, but, you know, can't be perfect at all. And she spends most of her time trying to figure out who she fancies more than anything else. And, oh, I just didn't like it. Can you tell? Can you tell I didn't like this book? Yeah, I wouldn't recommend. Definitely one of the duds of this year, unfortunately. Not one that I would highly recommend. And as is perhaps maybe not too surprising for a worst books of 2020 video, we're finishing up with another DNF. This book is The Middle Finger Project by Ash Ambroget. And this wasn't on my December TBR, I just kind of decided to give it a go. I kind of felt like I wanted a non-fiction, and I kind of felt like this was going to be quite a conversational but inspiring kind of, you know, outlook on life. It was talking about the imposter syndrome, which is something I find quite interesting, and basically just how to live your best life. And I thought, you know what, that sounds great. Let's finish off the year with a book like that. Where to start? I hated this book. I truly, truly hated this book. I gave it a 1 at the end. Now, I started off being like, oh, this will probably be about a 3. And then I went to a 2. And I'm pretty sure I even said in a vlog, I'll leave it at a 2 unless it becomes truly despicable, because I feel really bad giving things a 1. It's a 1. It really is. I really did not like this author. I didn't like any of it. She was talking about basically how to, you know, just grab your dreams and live your best life and don't let things hold you back. And so the basis of these things are fine. That's great. Be confident and go out there and try, and it doesn't matter if you fail, and all that stuff's great. It really, really is. And maybe some people just need to hear that, and that's wonderful. But she was so aggravating to me. She basically was saying that, you know, work-life balance doesn't exist and that work's going to be the main thing in your life because, you know, it's the thing you do most of your time doing. And I'm like, no, I just don't agree with that. She was like, make your passion your job so you don't mind spending all your time on it. And I'm like, I don't want my passion to be my job. Absolutely not. I want a clear, defining line between what I do for my job and what I do for fun. I don't want them coming anywhere near each other. I just scared a guinea pig. Anyway, I did not enjoy at all. She was so flippant about everything. It was just like, it doesn't matter about planning and thinking things through and making sensible decisions. It was just like, go for it, do it. Doesn't matter if you don't have enough money. Oh, maybe you do need money, because you should always have enough money to get yourself out of trouble, but don't let not having enough money stop you. Don't let being self-taught stop you. Don't let having no experience stop you. You know, and very anti-corporate jobs and very anti, oh, I don't know. She was just infuriating. She clearly loved the sound of her own voice. Most of what she said, I can't even say was common sense. It was just, the whole book was drivel. It was utter bullshit. I hated it. I genuinely hated it. I DNF'd this probably about 80% through because I was trying, beyond trying, to finish it. And I got to the realization of why. Why am I trying to finish this book when I know I don't like it? There's no way in hell this can get better for me here. I know it's awful. And I was like, actually, I need to stop. And I did. I stopped reading, and the relief that floated away that I had finished this book, oh my God, I can't even tell you. It was utter crap. And I feel so bad for being negative and trying not to come up with nice things about it, but I just hated it so much. The only thing I'll say about it that I thought was good was the delivery was nice. It was conversational. It wasn't dense. That was good. But the actual information was not good. It wasn't good advice. I'm not saying she's not successful and maybe it's worked for her, but I don't think giving the advice she gave was good for the general population. It's just not the way the world works. And I feel like people just can't take the risk and throw everything into a business that might not work. They've got families to feed. They've got lives. They can't just... It's different when you're like a single person and you're the only person you affect if you make a decision that affects things badly, you know? But if you're, you know, if you have a family or things to people to provide for, or you can't just throw everything away and take a risk. That's not sensible. That's not good advice to give people. I disagree with so much of what she said. I really did. And I just think some people might take away from it that she was quite inspiring and encouraging. And I just took it as someone who just has no idea how the majority of people live, or basically she just felt so out of touch with everything. I was like, you have no idea what you're on about. And a lot of it was just faff. Like, she would give a list of things to do and things that I think were meant to be funny, but they weren't funny. They were just completely pointless, and we're just buffing out this 8-hour something book that could have been a 20-minute TED Talk. And yeah, I don't recommend. I definitely don't recommend. Probably one of my least favourite books of the entire year. Not a fan. Not a fan at all. So we'll end it here before I get too ranty, because I've already been filming for quite a long time. So those were my 8 worst books I read in 2020. They really didn't work for me. Some people might like them, and if these books are ones that you really enjoy, then that's great. I'm glad that you've gotten great feelings out of them or information. If it works for you, that's fantastic. But for me, these totally missed the mark and were not what I was looking for, or just stuff that I didn't agree with, or wasn't to my taste. So that's my thoughts on those. Hopefully you enjoyed this semi-ranty video, and hopefully you will stick around and see my best books of 2020, which is a little bit more positive, thankfully. I'll see you again very soon for another video. Bye!